Urgent! Zelensky and Erdogan have formed a powerful alliance. Ankara is standing firm behind Kyiv. Turkish troops are already on standby. Ankara is abruptly changing the rules and striking where least expected. While Putin desperately clung to his friendship with Recep, Ankara sided with Kyiv and presented the Kremlin with the final bill. Shocking. Armenia is breaking its chains. Pashinyan slammed Putin on live television. The CSTO is collapsing. Armenia is laughing in the Kremlin's face. Allies are fleeing the sinking ship. An unexpected blow to the gut. Sensational! Putin launched all his drones, but they've returned like a deadly boomerang. The Ukrainian counterstrike is scorching the Russian rear. The armed forces of Ukraine have launched a ruthless counterattack. Ukrainian ballistic missiles are already over the Kremlin. The launch button has been pressed. Russia's decision-making centers will be wiped out. The countdown is in minutes. More on all of this later in our broadcast. Hotspot! A Turkish scimitar in Putin's back. Zelensky and Erdogan have shaken hands on a deal. Ankara has officially sided with Kyiv. This is the final blow to the Kremlin's ambitions. While Moscow was counting on their friend Recep, Ankara is delivering a crushing blow that has the Kremlin's walls shaking. Watch for all the details.
Zelensky is back in Turkey. However, this time it wasn't just about peace negotiations. Now Ukraine is a full-fledged ally and security partner. On his Facebook page, the Ukrainian leader stated that the relevant decisions at the state level have already been made.
In 2022, everyone was talking about the Turkish Bayraktar. They were even building a factory here in Ukraine, and we were essentially adopting their drone technology. Now the Turks will be adopting ours. 4 years have passed. In that sense, a lot has changed.
Analysts say it's important not just to sell your products, but also to secure long-term contracts. And when it comes to Turkey, it's necessary to build the interaction wisely so that the partnership doesn't turn into competition.
Both Ukraine and Turkey produce drones. This means that we need to make sure we are working closely together and coordinating our efforts carefully so that these drone deliveries to the Middle East region are carried out smoothly and do not end up having any negative impact on our partner. It is important that we pay attention to how these operations are managed so our partner is not affected in a harmful way. I'm speaking from the Ukrainian side. But Ukraine has extensive experience in conducting combat operations. That's a bit different because simply manufacturing a drone isn't always enough to defend against drones.
At the same time, perhaps the main thing Ukraine can offer is not just the drones themselves, but the experience of fighting drones and missiles using cheaper methods than NATO is used to. It's a sort of turnkey air defense model, which Ankara, having already fended off Iranian missiles 3 times, is extremely interested in today.
It involves tactics, electronic warfare systems, detection, and an anti-aircraft system, meaning how to shoot them down, and the overall organization of modern combat, how to operate in a kill zone, and how to use small forces and relatively inexpensive equipment to fight against traditionally armed conventional weapons. A fairly well-prepared and well-equipped army which includes not only helicopters and tanks but also a variety of other military vehicles and equipment, all of which are actually neutralized quite effectively, sometimes surprisingly so, by drones that are many times cheaper than any of these conventional weapons.
The president's meeting also touched upon the topic of negotiations. Zelensky and Erdogan confirmed that Istanbul could become a new venue for a trilateral meeting in the Ukraine-United States-Russia format.
Negotiations in Turkey took place back in 2022, as we recall, and in 2025 they began in the summer, specifically in Turkey. Moreover, Turkey, unlike the United Arab Emirates, took a much more active role in the process. The foreign minister there essentially acted as the moderator for the negotiations.
It is worth noting that earlier, the Secretary of the National Security Council, Rustem Umerov, visited Turkey. While there, he held a meeting with the Turkish Defense Minister Yaşar Güler. They discussed developments in humanitarian and defense cooperation between Kyiv and Ankara. However, analysts believe that they discussed more than just those topics.
I am deeply convinced that there are so-called facade topics, right, which he discusses in Turkey at his level, at the foreign minister's level, and at the defense minister's level. This includes Turkey's role as a negotiation platform, and it also involves the exchange of prisoners. But I am deeply convinced that there are also topics that do not make it into official media reports.
Among these, for example, experts point to Ukraine's overall role in the Middle East. After all, once the war in Iran concludes, many things are going to change. specifically in matters of trade, defense, maritime shipping, and more. This is exactly where Kyiv gets the chance to become a full-fledged player in the region. And it is better to discuss this in advance.
The president's visit to Turkey is not just about discussions on peace mediation, military cooperation, or economic relations. During this visit, I'm certain the Iranian war and the shifting balance of power in the Near and Middle East were discussed. Ukraine is a key player on the Asian map. This is a moment that, in principle, finally allows us to talk about not just international agency, but a certain soft power that Ukraine possesses.
In exchange, Ukraine is already gaining a reliable partnership with Turkey, which has once again confirmed it does not dispute our territorial integrity, and given recent meetings, will clearly take a more active role as a peacemaker.
And then a gut punch from yet another side. Pashinyan has arrived at the Kremlin to destroy Putin. A direct blow to the dictator's face. Nikol Pashinyan has done the impossible. The CSTO is falling apart. Armenia laughs in Putin's face. Former allies are turning away from Putin. Watch for all the details. Two friends met in the Kremlin, or rather, two former friends. Pashinyan came to Moscow to resolve important issues and even managed to troll Putin a bit.
I think the main interested party here is, of course, the Kremlin. Why Pashinyan cannot refuse is also clear, as Armenia is geographically located such that it, of course, needs good relations with Russia. Another thing is that the Armenian-Azerbaijani war and the non-intervention of Russia in this story showed that today Putin is capable of nothing, and as an ally, he is absolutely zero.
Of course, the focus is on the upcoming parliamentary elections in Armenia, which interest the Russian dictator quite a bit.
There are many political forces that are pro-Russian. Of course, I'll tell you quite frankly, we would very much like all these political parties, politicians to be able to take part in this essential internal political work during the course of the elections.
Is Putin really harboring his last hopes of maintaining control over the country?
Putin is trying his best to influence all the elections he can influence, and he influences them in known ways.
But even in this case, Pashinyan gave a tough answer to the dictator and destroyed his pipe dreams.
He says and makes it clear that Armenian passports are not actually required. No. He says more subtly that you'll stuff it with people with Russian passports, that only people with one citizenship can be elected here. And goodbye.
Although, of course, strangely enough, any interference in Armenia's elections is denied in the Kremlin itself.
Look, European representatives, they see Moscow's interference in everything. Everywhere and in everything.
Where would we be without discussing enemies? Putin is effectively warning the course towards the EU could cost Yerevan too much, from cheap gas to political pressure.
We understand that naturally any country would strive to achieve the maximum possible benefits from cooperation, or as this is only reasonable, with third countries. But it must be obvious, it must be fair, stated in advance, as they say at the outset, being in a customs union with the European Union and with the EAEU is impossible. It's simply impossible.
But it seems that's when the Prime Minister stood up to Putin. And within the walls of the Kremlin, he told him where to go.
As long as there is an opportunity to combine, we will combine these agendas. And when the processes develop to the point where it will be necessary to make some kind of decision, I am sure that the citizens of the Republic of Armenia will make that decision.
It seems Putin is losing an ally and a member of his Eurasian Economic Union, who doesn't even deny that he might change course toward Western countries.
What is the appeal of an alliance with Putin anyway? The only thing Putin says directly is that we have lower gas prices. But Pashinyan thinks to himself, tomorrow they'll bomb everything, and you won't have any gas left either, and so on. It's clear that, of course, from a strategic perspective, closer ties with the European Union are much more interesting.
Freedom, independence, and democracy are words that make Putin's eyes pop out of his head, but against the backdrop of constant internet outages in Russia.
This is all for your safety. You should switch to Max and vContactor. To hell with you and your Max and your vContactor.
Pashinyan decided to boldly jab the Kremlin master with words that trigger him and reminded him of the joys of Putinism.
There are citizens who think that there is too much democracy in Armenia. But for us, this is a matter of principle. Our social networks, for example, are 100% free. There are absolutely no restrictions.
The final rift between the countries occurred in 2022, when hostilities flared up on the border of Armenia and Azerbaijan. Moreover, the clashes were already taking place on the territory of Armenia itself. However, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which includes the Russian Federation, never intervened.
We are not currently participating in the work of the CSTO, and there is a simple reason for this. At this time, we are still unable to clearly explain to our people, to our citizens, why the CSTO did not react. And it did not react.
Meanwhile, rallies against the Prime Minister were held in the center of Moscow. Could it be a staged performance? He promised the people peace. Such bold answers from the Armenian Prime Minister suggest that the country no longer needs Russia's help or Putin's so-called support.
Putin spends so much energy on the war with Ukraine that he simply has no energy left for anything else. And so when those who used to be allies, partners, whatever you want to call them, of Putin, when they have serious problems, Putin is unable to help anyone at all, and so the allies fall away with varying degrees of activity.
And the most surprising thing is that we are seeing this dialogue. The Kremlin has essentially brought into the public sphere a conversation that hardly earns Putin any points. Are things really so bad with the allies that even moments like these are being broadcast? And it seems the circle of friends around him is getting narrower and narrower.
Record-breaking hell in the sky. Putin launched all the drones but got a deadly ricochet. The Ukrainian response is burning the Russian Federation on live air. There's never been such a barrage. The AFU have launched a counterattack. A painful blow to the very heart of Russia. A response the Kremlin didn't expect. Watch for the details.
In response to strikes on civilian targets in Ukraine, the AFU are systematically destroying the occupiers' military facilities. This is another crushing blow by the unmanned systems forces against the aggressors' military targets. In occupied Crimea at the Kirovsky airfield, Ukrainian drones destroyed 4 strike and reconnaissance UAVs, the Orion and Antonov 72P transport aircraft, and the Mech radar station. The base itself, from which strikes were systematically launched against Ukraine, has been put out of action for a long time. The Antonov 72P is a rare transport aircraft used for special military missions. They are not mass-produced but are custom-built.
It was destroyed on the ground. Our unmanned systems forces were at work here. Any aerial target, cruise missile, or ballistic missile is best destroyed before it even takes off. Once it's already in the air, it's much harder to intercept.
And this is a strike by Lasar's group fighters, supported by the Black Lynx Artillery Reconnaissance Brigade. Together, they destroyed one of the most powerful Russian electronic warfare systems, the Palantin. The cost of this unique equipment is over $20 million. In recent weeks, Ukrainian strikes have intensified. These include strikes on critically important export terminals in the Baltic Sea, an attack on one of the largest explosive manufacturing plants in Chapayevsk. Strikes on the military-industrial complex have become so effective that Russia decided to move missile production from Moscow and its region deeper into the country, beyond the Urals. But according to Roscosmos head Dmitry Bakanov, this is done solely to optimize output and reduce production costs.
The legendary Energomash enterprise is located in Khimki, but it's obvious that the design bureau, with its expertise, knowledge, and people, must be preserved. However, the cost of industrial mass production in Khimki is becoming exorbitant because there are so many overhead costs due to the 92 hectares of production facilities located there.
First, the Ukrainian army weakens the Russian air defense, and then they strike critically important targets in that zone for several days in a row. According to official data, Russian air defense intercepted 7,440 Ukrainian UAVs of various types in March. How many reached their targets is unknown. In turn, Ukrainian air defense shot down 5,935 Shaheds and UAVs of other modifications. This amounted to an 89.9% shoot-down rate, which means that for the first time since the war began, Ukraine has seized the initiative in such strikes.
Ukraine's military industry was able to successfully overcome the previous lag in drone production, including not only battlefield drones, but also long-range drones. And it has overtaken Russia. That is what was previously considered to be such a serious advantage for the Russian army, the great ability to scale up the production of these weapons. Today, this Russian advantage has been eliminated.
Despite the relocation of missile plants in the Russian Federation, Ukraine has an adequate response. So far, the longest-range strike was carried out at a distance of 1,900 kilometers. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky recently stated that Kyiv has developed drones and missiles capable of accurately covering a distance of 3,000 kilometers.
Moscow to ashes, Ukrainian thunder over the Kremlin, the launch button is already pressed, prepare for hell, the countdown is in minutes. Ukrainian ballistics have moved to firing positions. Zelensky's missile fist is officially formed for the total neutralization of decision-making centers in the Russian Federation. Which targets in the Russian Federation will be wiped out? First, watch. Ukraine is preparing weapons capable of reaching the very heart of Russia. By around the middle of 2026, Ukrainian technology developers promise to take their own ballistics to a new level.
The first ones should go in just like kids going to school.
We are talking about FPV-7 and FPV-9 missiles capable of fundamentally changing the geography of the war. If today the strike range is limited to hundreds of kilometers,
Many, we can do it daily. We'll produce as many as ordered.
in the coming months, the range will increase to 850. And that's enough to threaten not only the border regions, but Moscow itself.
Now, right now, such strikes have already begun, which Russia is really showing our capabilities.
And we're not just talking about precision strikes, but potentially massive use. According to the developers, dozens of missiles can be launched at once, 20, 30 or more. And in this case, even modern air defense systems become overwhelmed. Intercepting such a flow of targets becomes a task on the edge of possibility even for Patriot-level systems, not to mention the Soviet systems in the Russian Federation.
It's hard for them to intercept such missiles.
Each of these missiles performs its own task on the battlefield, and together they form a new strike architecture, FPV-7.
The very first successful launch, which was indeed a confirmed success, was notably in the city of Taganrog, when we finished off an A-50 in a hangar that had come in for some refitting.
This ballistic missile is considered a closer range tool. Its range is up to 300 kilometers, warhead up to 250 kilograms, high precision and relatively low cost.
It's a kind of replacement for AT-CMS, a cheap one.
Such a missile allows for systematically taking out enemy warehouses, headquarters and logistics deep behind the front lines. FP9 is a completely different level. Its range is up to 850 kilometers with a warhead of up to 800 kilograms. And this is an actual transition to full-scale operational tactical ballistics. We're talking about hitting strategic targets, from military facilities to key infrastructure deep inside Russia. Both missiles are launched from the same mobile launcher, similar to the one used for the Flamingo system. This means speed of deployment, stealth, and the ability to quickly change positions, making detection difficult and moreover, a European anti-ballistic shield will be created based on the FPV-7 missile.
We're now planning to create a pan-European anti-ballistic shield based on the FP7, because this missile has a vertical launch, tilts quickly, is very maneuverable, and was originally designed to intercept ballistic targets.
Furthermore, Ukraine is set to introduce FPV drones as large as a Flamingo missile. This marks another step in expanding their lineup of strike capabilities. While Ukrainian developers continue to bolster their own capabilities, the Russian Federation has, so far, only managed to brilliantly master the art of intimidation. And the widely known Oreshnik ballistic missile has proven to be utterly useless in the context of modern warfare.
It is essentially a truncated intercontinental missile. They simply removed one of the stages from it. These are medium-range missiles specifically designed for carrying nuclear warheads. It is incapable of carrying conventional weapons, and frankly, nobody has any use for that. It is just a waste, just to show that we can launch it. Oreshnik, well, good job. Using missiles like these only makes sense when it comes to nuclear weaponry.
Once again, Ukraine is proving that it is not the number of people or kilometers on a map that truly matters, but the ability to systematically build a framework that translates technology into tangible results on the battlefield. And it appears that in the very near future, the Russian Federation will fully experience the true impact of these Ukrainian developments. Shocking news, 500,000 men under arms. Lukashenko has officially declared a mobilization. But something unexpected has come to light. Secret negotiations with both Washington and Pyongyang. Who will save the dictator? While Moscow awaits fresh cannon fodder, a panicked Lukashenko is scrambling between the White House and Kim Jong-un. What is the old man really planning? Watch.
Lukashenko is preparing Belarus for war.
There can be no such thing as peacetime, and people must understand that.
During a meeting following a comprehensive inspection of the army, the self-proclaimed president stated that the country must prepare for a full-scale armed conflict, despite official statements regarding a desire for peace.
We are absolutely against war, especially our officers, our soldiers, and the entire armed forces, because we know exactly what war is. We do not want war. But that is exactly what the army is for. If suddenly someone decides to talk to us and look at us through the sights of their weapons, we will respond. That is what we are preparing for.
Since January, a large-scale, sudden and comprehensive check of the combat readiness of the armed forces initiated by Lukashenko has been underway in Belarus. The primary requirement for the military leadership was to shift combat training from a peacetime footing to the reality of an actual combat engagement. According to him, in the event of war, Belarus could increase the number of its troops to 500,000 people.
The determination of the armed forces to repel any enemy and the readiness to instantly react to any aggressive movement toward our borders is the only guarantee for the peace and security of the state.
Lukashenko, who has been leading Belarus for more than 30 years now, remains the Kremlin's primary ally. He tries to project strength while at the same time pleasing Putin so that nothing threatens his power. He is not interested in directly dragging Belarus into the Russo-Ukrainian war, as this could lead to extremely unpleasant strategic consequences for him, up to and including removal from power.
Our idea is absolutely the same. You know our ideas, we know the Russian ideas. This is one fatherland. From Brest to Vladivostok, we have one fatherland. Well, it just so happened, not by our will, that two states were formed here. And we must do everything so that our relations in this fatherland were even closer than in a unitary state.
Also, quite recently, Lukashenko visited North Korea on an official visit, during which he held talks with the country's leader, Kim Jong-un. The parties discussed the further development of political, economic, and military cooperation, as well as issues of strengthening bilateral relations. And also, recently, Lukashenko has established relations with Donald Trump. The self-proclaimed president may take part in the next meeting of the Board of Peace, recently created at the initiative of the United States President.
Lukashenko uses a well-known tactic, the so-called walking between the raindrops. That is, he tries to maneuver between the interests of the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China, and the United States. He creates so-called centers of counterweights, which allows him to solve the main issue for himself, namely maintaining his own power, and accordingly the possibility of its inheritance.
Lukashenko is playing a dangerous game. He tries not to become a Kremlin puppet, so he seeks support in North Korea and the United States. Every step he takes in relations with Washington or Pyongyang is an attempt to save his regime and find resources where they don't pressure him as hard as they do in Moscow.
Urgent! A countdown has been launched in the Kremlin. Putin has set his generals an impossible, insane task: to capture the entire Donetsk region at any cost by a critical date. This is the dictator's final bet. The new commanders are in horror. They know what Putin doesn't see. Why will this order be the end for the Russian army? Watch.
The Kremlin has set new deadlines for the capture of the Ukrainian Donbas. Kostiantynivka by April 25th, the entire Donetsk region by the end of the year.
We see that strategic resources for offensive operations in, as we have repeatedly noted, 8 operational directions the enemy does not have.
But deadlines are one thing, and a real result is quite another. According to the Ukrainian military, Russian units are already trying to enter Kostiantynivka itself, which automatically moves the fighting into the urban phase, the most difficult and time-consuming.
The timelines they have planned for themselves can be multiplied by n months. If they carry out active assault operations and throw all their resources into capturing Kostiantynivka, then, in my opinion, they might achieve something, but not before October.
After all, the deeper the Russian army gets drawn into urban combat, the slower its progress becomes, and the higher the price of every meter. At the same time, the tactics themselves remain the same, but they are becoming increasingly desperate. First, mobile groups on motorcycles and buggies are deployed. Then armored vehicles join in, followed by attempts to gain a foothold in the outskirts and gradually gnaw through the Ukrainian defenses.
The war could drag on for another year or two, and negotiations on signing a peace agreement have reached a stalemate. Ukraine expects a new onslaught in April and May, but experts predict that the inability of Russian troops to break through the defenses will lead to a shift in focus to strikes on critical infrastructure. Kyiv's strategy is to inflict losses exceeding the mobilization rate in the Russian Federation, where about 45,000 recruits are enlisted every month.
And while thousands of Russian soldiers die daily beyond the front line, the Kremlin's war machine is already looking for a new resource.
There is no turning back. It is a one-way ticket.
But in practice, the situation in Russia is quite different, and they are planning to sacrifice those who were sitting in classrooms just yesterday and making plans for the future, students. At the beginning of 2026, the Minister of Science and Higher Education, Valery Falkov, at a closed meeting with the rectors of the largest universities, effectively handed down a plan to them. At least 2% of students must sign contracts with the Ministry of Defense. Formally, this is presented as a guideline, but in essence, it is an unspoken quota that, according to sources, was discussed at the level of university leadership across the country.
Administrations of universities and technical schools across Russia are persistently suggesting that students take a leave of absence, sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense for at least a year, and go to war with Ukraine.
And this mechanism is already working. While at the end of 2025, these were isolated cases, since February 2026, the campaign has become widespread and covered nearly 200 universities and colleges across the country, turning the education system into one big recruitment center.
According to last year's data, 2 million men were studying in Russian universities. If the universities manage to fulfill the Ministry of Education and Science's requirement, the Russian army will receive at least an additional 44,000 fighters. If the 2% plan was also set for technical schools, then a total of 76,000 young people will sign contracts.
And we are not talking about trained reservists or experienced contract soldiers. Contracts are being offered even to freshmen who are only 18 to 20 years old.
Young people are promised they can return to their studies once their contract ends and are reminded of high state payments and extensive benefits available to participants in the war with Ukraine. Additionally, the standard set of bonuses includes the opportunity to transfer from a paid department to a tuition-free one. Some wealthier universities like MGU and SPBGU promise students additional payments from their own funds. At Baumanka, they promise free health resort treatment.
And those who hesitate are directly hinted at the risk of expulsion. The key focus of this campaign is not just on replenishing the army, but on forming a supposedly new type of troops, unmanned ones. That's where they try to send students first, promising modern warfare, technology, and supposedly safer service.
There are no special contracts for UAV operators. There are no one-year contracts. They don't exist and cannot exist. The presidential decree on partial mobilization remains in effect. During the period of partial mobilization, you cannot terminate a contract on your own initiative.
In my view, there's only one way out. If in a specific university, in a specific technical school, anything happens that suggests starting or ongoing indoctrination, the only option is to run away from there, grabbing your things and leaving in a hurry.
And while the Russian dictator continues to hide the real state of affairs at the front, an irreversible process has long been launched inside the RF. A process that will sooner or later bring the great and powerful to their knees. That's all for now, and watch for more fiery news from the front in the next episode.